So I want to welcome everyone to the North American Climate Justice Team's November webinar. Prophet President Steve Veazey has several times mentioned, we live between what was and what will be. And it's in the between that our webinars attempt to explore, to prepare ourselves for what will be. There are far too many that have their feet firmly planted in the what was. And as a faith community, we strive to discern what will be, to tentatively reach out and dip our toes into unknown waters. Our North American way of life, built and based on creation, climate, economic, and racial injustice, is unsustainable. Yet the path to justice, to sustainability, is not always readily visible. So our goal is that together we might study, share, pray, and discern those paths. A few housekeeping issues before we dive in. First, if you have comments or questions during the webinar, please put them into the chat directed to Dean White, our chat monitor for today. And I want to remind everyone that our next webinar will be December 4th. We start our program today with just a short CNN video interview with climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe, describing conditions in our current in-between time. So please listen to Katharine. Our next segment, we'll look at the climate aspects of the lamentably named IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the first aggressive attempt in the US to address climate change that was recently passed and signed by the US government. Now, we acknowledge that a sizable number of our attendees live north of the 49th parallel, also known as the US-Canadian border. However, there is a benefit to studying how other nations succeed or fail at addressing climate issues. And several have pointed out that legislation in the US often affects those in Canada. So to shed light on the intricacies of the IRA, we'd like to welcome our presenter, Randy Litzenberger, back to our webinar. So Randy is co-chair of the Seattle 34th District Environmental Energy and Land Use Caucus, and a climate mitigation advocate. He's a high school teacher specializing in social and policy issues and is often guest speakers to groups beyond the high school level. Earlier this year, Randy gave us an excellent summary of the COP26 meetings a year ago. And if we're lucky, maybe we can talk him into coming back and filling us in on the results of COP27 currently being held in Egypt. However, today, Randy's going to help us better understand the IRA. So Randy, the monitor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we can get some slides pulled up here, and I'll do my best to be worthy of the praise and share a little bit with everyone. All right, let's see if that pops up. Hopefully you can see that first slide there. Okay. Well, thank you, first off, for the invitation to come back and to be able to share here today what I've learned in the last couple months, really. And I think that a number of us have been keeping track ever since the summer to what the Inflation Reduction Act means. Interesting title, that, to be sure. And as I mentioned in my previous presentations, we are right at this turning point, I think, in terms of the world that we have known, that we've grown up with, the world that has been fossil fuels and pretty minimal federal guidance in terms of climate, and now a world that, especially over the last decade, has become more and more focused on alternative sources of energy. And we've seen the cost of renewables, particularly solar and wind, drop dramatically over the last 10 years, 90% really in terms of the cost for installed solar photovoltaic from 10 years ago to where they are now. Even with some of the challenges of the interrupted economy here through COVID and the like, and some of the Trump administration's policies, we've still seen that reduction continue. And we're also starting to see it in batteries and a whole host of other things. So it may make you wonder necessarily what job is left for the Inflation Reduction Act to be able to do, at least in the climate sense. We know that the IRA, which I'll refer to it here as, just for simplicity's sake, is something that goes beyond climate. It certainly touches on areas of healthcare and the like as well. But much of it here, as well as deficit reduction, much of our purpose here is to be able to focus on it. Some of its intricacies, I'll be getting into that a little bit. But I especially want to be good in getting into this aspect about what it means for all of us here in the United States as consumers. And as Paul was talking about, for our neighbors to the north and elsewhere, hopefully we can provide for a change on this topic, some kind of inspiring example. It seems like the United States has been the laggard for quite a while. Now we get to show a little bit of what we've been up to, and hopefully what the Inflation Reduction Act will do for all of us and, of course, the world beyond. So just a quick recap. This pulls a little bit from one of my previous stations. I promise I'll be brief on this. But one thing I spoke to all of you about in my previous presentation earlier this year was about this change and evolution really in terms of energy policy. And the recap essentially goes like this. We have, for the last 20 years, collectively as a planet, been pushing this boulder up the hill, slowly grinding away with a mix of different credits and incentives and investments and the like that have come from energy policy. It's been slow going at times, but we've really seen the acceleration since 2010 in that massive drop in prices and now increasing adoption. I referenced the IRENA report from 2021 in my last presentation. It talked about the proof of concept that we have really pushed this boulder up to the top of the hill, and all we need now is energy policy that is going to clear the obstacles away for the avalanche of renewable clean energy that is increasingly coming our way. Even in the now something like 9 months, I think, since my last presentation, we're seeing this come on faster and faster and faster. Most notably in the transportation sector, where the sales of, say, electric vehicles in the United States has doubled here in 2022 compared to what it was in 2021. But I think that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. If we borrow from another metaphor, there's some pieces that we see above the waterline, but there's so much that's changing systemically in the economy in the United States and elsewhere towards a clean energy economy. Of course, as well, understand the role that geopolitical events, like what the war taking place in Ukraine is doing, which has changed access to cheap natural gas from Russia to a very different set of circumstances for our European friends who are now facing a cold winter, to be sure, but we're seeing ultimately this chance to transition to renewable energy be accelerated by that, at least in the medium and long term. So something for us to think about just in terms of context there and this transition that's going on. So what is the IRA? I'll keep it simple here as far as the climate aspect. The big picture, of course, is that it includes $369 billion in a mix of rebates and tax credits, point of sale benefits and the like, and investments that will reduce emissions in the United States by 40% by the time we get to 2030. That's compared to where we were in 2005. The United States was already on track to get to about 25% reductions by 2030, mostly due to natural gas adoption over coal over the last 10 years, but also due to the increase in renewables. Now, the anticipation here, according to the U.S. Senate and the Budget Office and the like, is that we're going to be seeing acceleration on top of that. Does that get us to where we need to go as far as 50% reductions by 2030? No, but we have to remember, as I mentioned in my previous presentations, we also have to consider what markets are doing right now and how those may develop. And that's something that's very difficult to quantify. And what we've learned certainly in the last 10 years of reports, as we saw there from that excellent presentation for Fareed Zakaria and Dr. Hayhoe, was that so much of what we've seen compared to 20 years ago, we've seen improvements in terms of our estimation about where the planet is going by 2100. But we also have to understand that even as our knowledge and our measurement and the like has increased and we see more and more detail about what a world with that kind of warming looks like, that's something that we have essentially seen as in reverse, I think, with the renewable energy sector, that we had a very poor view of things up until recently as far as how quickly clean energy would be transforming markets. And now with great policy, how quickly that's going to, I think, transform the way Americans live, how they power their homes, and the like. So just a few things here. This from the PBS NewsHour in terms of the 3 ways IRA incentives are going to green investments and the like with it. First off, we want to think about those home energy rebates. This is a big piece of the puzzle. We know that in our homes, most of us have natural gas appliances and the like, and a whole host of things from heating water to heating space to heating food in terms of cooktops. Those are pretty common ways that we see in homes. But there's a lot of money in the IRA to incentivize going electric with your appliances. Most appliances have a certain lifespan of 10 to 15 years, maybe 20 if you're lucky. And ultimately, we have to replace those. And what will increasingly be flooding the market with this now is going to be better and better versions of electric appliances. Many of them already out there, like induction cook stoves and so forth, have as good as or better performance than natural gas. So that increases access. And we're going to see some case studies here in a minute that speak to that from Rewiring America. I'll get to that in a moment. We also have to consider that there's investments in terms of heat pumps, which are a much more efficient way to warm your home and the like with it as well, and also to cool your home in the summer. Heat pumps get to do that as well. There's also money for rooftop solar, electric HVAC, and water heaters as well. These come in the form of tax credits that we're all a little more familiar with, where you get the chance to be able to file your credits the next year, claim that piece and the like for it, to be able to reduce your tax burden based on your purchases and changes to your home the previous year. And then the one, again, that most people are familiar with, that we see on all the roads now, to buy a new or used electric vehicle that meets requirements, you're getting money off at the point of sale. And that's a change from what was there previously before the IRA this summer, that in a lot of cases, those tax credits as they were expiring for many automakers because they limited out. They had reached the amount the federal government would permit in terms of 250,000 vehicles sold. Tesla, for example, was seeing that on a declining sunsetting provision. Now, assuming your vehicle is made in the United States, your electric vehicle is made in the United States, and that the battery has a certain percent that will rise over time and is composed of minerals made in the United States or our major trading partners, you're going to see a $7,500 point of sale reduction in terms of the cost for your electric vehicle for new vehicles, and as much as $4,000 for used vehicles. That will be very helpful for us to consider with it. So that's something to think about, and some pretty exciting stuff there to just kind of categorize this broadly into three areas. So what I'd like to do here talks a little bit about transportation, but mostly about your home, and that's some electric inspiration here for us to consider. This comes from Rewiring America. Saw a great presentation with them here about a month ago. Wanted to share this with the audience, give you a chance to kind of see some case studies on the one hand, and maybe get inspired, but also to be able to find out with a really great calculator that I think helps you understand what your rebates will be or are now already in terms of making changes to your home to electrify it, to bring in new appliances and all sorts of things to make those changes with it. So some case studies to help you build your electric plan. We're going to be hearing from Cora Wyant here in about a 4-minute video in just a second for you to be able to see some of the different case studies. I'll lay those out briefly. And then we'll get a chance to kind of talk about ultimately this calculator before we look to the future and what this past week, certainly for a certain election in the United States, may or may not mean for the Inflation Reduction Act, climate policy, and the like. So briefly here, before I turn it over to the video, we're going to look at 4 case studies. And you can see them laid out there in the 4 different kind of placards, if you will. Case study number 1, the Colemans care about cost and climate. Family in Cleveland, Ohio with a modest income, hoping to realize their electric dreams. And you can see some of the different profiles there, which you'll see on screen again shortly for the video. Family of 4, income $128,000. The area median income under 80%. In that location in Cleveland, Ohio. So are they able to access their dreams of electrifying their home? We'll see that shortly. Case study number 2, Garcias want a beautiful future for their child. They want to do their part for the climate crisis, and they also want to save money, which is certainly, when we get to the economics of this, a big piece of the puzzle. So a family of three, income $130,000, the area median income under 150% of that. The location is Sacramento, California. So we'll see that from another corner of the country. Retired Georgia couple for case study number 3 want to electrify their apartment. Renters on a budget show it can be done, at least to an extent here. And household profiles, 2 people, income $30,000 in terms of that area median income under 80% rather, from Atlanta, Georgia. And then finally, a case study, the 4th one, reaching for resilience. A well-resourced Oklahoma family electrifies for security and the climate crisis. We can see the profile there with a family of 5, income of $280,000, and above 150% of the area median income, and that location, Oklahoma City. So we're going to see that here directly now. I'm going to do my best to not fumble through the transition, as I often do when it comes to this, but let's see if we can bring this up. Short video, it's going to talk through some things for you, and then we'll get a chance to see how this may apply to you in terms of a great calculator that I'm happy to share here today. All right. And I remember to click the sound box, so hopefully this works like magic. We shall see. Let's give it a go.
So this is an example of a house in Cleveland, Ohio, where it's a 4-person household. Their income is $128,000. So that's under 80% of the area median income. So that means that they're eligible for 100% of their electrification costs to be covered under the electrification rebates. So for example, what this household has chosen to do is replace their propane water heater with a heat pump water heater, and they get basically a $1,750 rebate for that, and then a tax credit too, which turns a $3,000 piece of equipment into an $875 piece of equipment. You can kind of go down and see that this household can basically fully electrify for only $10,000, including replacing a gas car with a used EV. So these incentives really reduce the upfront cost of electrification for some households. And then this is just showing again what their electrified house looks like. So they've got sort of weatherization and a heat pump. They've got their water heater replacement. They've got a used EV, and they've been able to cap their gas line and save on the sort of fixed gas fee each month at their home. So this next household is in Sacramento, California. Their income is within that 80 to 150% range. So they're eligible for up to 50% of their electrification costs to be covered. So in this case, you can see that this household chooses to switch a gas range out for an induction range, and they get an upfront discount equal to half the cost of that range. They switch their gas furnace to a central heat pump, and again, they get half of that cost covered. So they end up electrifying for $35,000, where without the rebates, it would have been $60,000. And then this is also including solar and an EV. So, those are things that will give you utility bill savings too. So even though there is this upfront cost of $35,000 for this family, there would be some payback period based on the solar and the EVs having sort of a payback over time. And I'll just skip through to get to the last two, but a lot of these rebates are going to be able to apply to renters too, from our best understanding. So this is a retired Georgia couple, this low income that electrifies their apartment by getting window unit heat pumps and by getting a portable induction burner. And we'll have to make sure that DOE, when they release the guidance for the states, sort of allows these to be used for renters. But if they do, they would basically get those window unit heat pumps and the portable induction burner for free. And then finally, we've got here a higher income family in Oklahoma, AMI above 150%, that's really interested in resilience, so getting battery storage and being able to sort of withstand a power outage in their community. So you can see here that they have to pay for upfront costs of electrification, which they have the resources to do, but they do end up getting I think that's $17,000 back in tax credits and $15,000 back in upfront rebates for their electric car. All right, so those are a couple examples of how this Inflation Reduction Act could be used differently for different types of households. And I'll sort of share this link to the calculator in the chat again, so that you can look and see sort of based on your income and based on your area, what you qualify for. And there's a great list of FAQs on that calculator page if we aren't able to get to all of them today.
Okay, so indeed, and tying a little bit, borrowing from Rewiring America's video there. I hope that was educational in terms of looking at some of the scenarios. And I have also, following Core Alliance suggestion, put that into the chat as far as something we're going to look at next, which is that app, the calculator and the like, that lets you dig into some of the pieces there. So let me come back to the slides here, and we'll continue. Looks like we're ready to go. All right. So considering those case studies, and obviously they're meant to give some kind of framing for us to think a little bit about as far as how you can connect with something like the federal rebates, tax credits, point of sale benefits, and all that are now coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. But to get much more precise with that, that's why I wanted to share that calculator link in the chat space. So feel free to open that up. And this is obviously just a snip of it to kind of show you. But when it comes to that zip code and the like, homeowner status, household income, it walks you through pretty easily, tax filing, household size. And we'll show a couple examples of that here just for our reference. Let me do that again. Bounce over here, get us a chance to kind of see how this works. Okay, so if I use myself as the case study, my zip code, homeowner, average household income, a little teacher's salary with my wife's salary put together on public display, no less, so keep it under your hat. Household size, 4 of us here. So if I run the calculation with that, let's see what it says. So if we scroll down a little bit, you can see the total incentives that are available to me in my circumstance here would be $32,550. There's upfront discounts that is covering up to 50% of the costs. That's something that is on a sliding scale based on my income as I placed it. The lower my income, the higher percentage of that it can cover. Available tax credits, and then of course the estimated bill savings per year. Now, for me, what this doesn't know, obviously, is the extent to which I've already electrified my home, which for our home, we're all electric. We already have solar. I think I may mention that in a previous presentation. We have 2 electric cars, both from the discount end of the spectrum, a couple Nissan Leafs. So there's some pieces there that I don't really need to worry about so much. But there may be some other ones as far as appliances age out in my house now, which is almost 15 years old, and those appliances are about that same age. There may be some pieces I have to replace anyway. So something to think about there. As you scroll down, you can see some pieces, and maybe the most important one here that I'm going to commend you later is the challenge of the electric panel. We definitely learned this in the last few years, that ultimately you get to a point where the service to your house needs to be upgraded. This is, according to Electrify America, or Rewiring America rather, the greatest single stumbling block for American homes. Single family homes, I think multifamily residences as well within reason, that those electrical panels are ultimately, they need to be expanded in terms of access, because as you're replacing natural gas or other heat for your home and energy for your home, if it's going to be electrified, you have to have a bigger panel to be able to handle that. So that's something that I would recommend that everybody, if they haven't had this opportunity to make that change now, be looking into that in the very near term future. And I'm pleased to see that there are now federal rebates for you to do that. It's not as sexy, I suppose, as that new electric car and the like, but it's good fundamental groundwork that you need to be able to do to be able to electrify your home or residence and the like with it. You can see money there for an electric stove, electric wiring as well, one of those hidden costs that we always forget about until the electrician's bill comes due. Heat pump water heater, heat pump air conditioner heater as well, even a heat pump clothes dryer, some money for weatherization, and then a whole home energy reduction and the like there, which is an estimate and a chance to learn more. We can see a lot that's there for me as a homeowner, which is great. Probably not going to go geothermal heating installation for my house. That's something that's available now. You can see some other pieces that will be available next year. Most of it in the like rooftop solar installations available now, and so forth. So something to think about there as far as it, and there's more info for you to be able to access. Hopefully, as I'm saying this, you're all in the background typing away, playing around with it because it's kind of addicting. Let's put another one in. Hey, Susan, can we use you as an example again, as we talked about the other day?
Sure. Same zip code. And
Great.
yeah, shall we name me a homeowner or a renter?
You make the call. You're the boss.
Well, I'm actually a homeowner with my condo, so let's try homeowner, even though it's
Great.
more like an apartment thing. My
Great.
income is about $47,000.
Great.
And I'm filing single, only one
Great.
person.
Roger that.
And-
except when the grandkids are there, right?
Yeah, except when the grandkids are here, and calculate.
Nice. All right, let's take a look. Okay, now you can see, first off, the biggest change here, obviously, in the total incentives, about half of what was available to me in my home. But note, because of the different income level, those upfront discounts can cover up to 100% of the cost. And there's a little blowout information the like there for it. Chance for you to be able to see that at a little bit of a different level. Estimated bill savings per year are pretty similar. Available tax credits are probably the biggest difference here in terms of that for it. If we scroll down, you can see that money for the electric panels, same thing we were talking about earlier. That's one of the biggest things to do. Money for an electric stove, electric wiring, lots of similarities here for it. A lot of pieces there. Note the difference in the whole home energy reduction. That's double what was available for me in terms of it. And that's all income based. That's basically the further down the income scale you go, availability you have. So this is a pretty forward-thinking piece of legislation. I think it does come up a little bit short in the renter one, which we can throw in here in a second, that there's just simply less that it does for renters. It's more towards those basically residents as well. But this is something that is largely geared towards that part of the American demographic slice. More details here, as you can see. Hey, Susan, looks like you can grab a pretty good deal with a new electric vehicle or a used one for it. So
Absolutely.
nice. So great opportunities there.
So if you're going to try a renter, why don't you use my information and make me a renter? Because condo living is kind of halfway between.
Great, let's do it.
And let's use my neighbor who only makes $30,000.
Great. All right. Everything else the same?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's run the numbers. All right. Yeah, and you can see there again, a little bit different in terms of the discounts, available tax credits, and some limitations there for it as well compared to it. And that's a big switch, although it's still pretty hefty for renters. And we can see again, estimate and the like for that as well. We can see most of it focuses on electric stove, a heat pump, air conditioner, heater, probably a window unit, because most renters can't really make that decision for themselves as far as their central heating and so forth. Heat pump, clothes dryer. There's a fair amount of money that is there for those pieces, but a number of the other pieces are not available. Electric vehicle charger, that would be interesting to see how you do that with a rental situation, but possibly depending on the unit. And then a lot of it's tied up in transportation, the new vehicle or used vehicle, similar to what we saw with Susan's example for herself, as opposed to for a neighbor. So certainly, again, this is limiting based in terms of the rental situation versus ownership. But I think we have to look at this in the sense of what are the most likely areas that a renter has for their carbon footprint, for what they can control and the like in terms of what they own. There's a few appliances, but then it's really transportation that this is geared towards, which makes some sense anyway. So a little bit to consider there. And just to pause real quick before we look at the last few pieces for it, I know Susan had mentioned this in the comments earlier. I'm happy to field questions, but let me know. And as I'm flying along, I don't want to miss anybody if they've got something for it.
So Randy, let me ask, there are a couple of questions. One is there anything in the IRA that incentivizes governments to implement these kinds of upgrades in government-owned housing? And I'm thinking of public housing and military-owned housing, for example.
Yeah, it's a good question, Dean. And I think that when it comes to how the federal government is providing guidance to state governments or even local municipalities, You do see some pieces in there that I'm a bit less familiar with in the consumer points. A lot of this is really pointed towards consumers for the climate pieces, but probably the biggest areas where you see investment outside of consumers is towards utilities and towards different aspects of what is currently mostly fossil fuel production to reduce methane. You see a methane tax that is there for it, although limited. It's a step forward, which is designed to bring some of that down. But as far as money for cities and state governments and the like, there's some pieces of that still need to get sorted out. When I was talking to both my state representatives here, I'm in West Seattle with 34th Democrats, I was talking with them the other night, and then also our utility, Seattle City Light, when you ask them about, well, when are we going to start to see the Inflation Reduction Act really get going and those funds and the like that are going to states start to become apparent what that's going to mean? And they mostly do this because it's still in the process of being fleshed out. I think 2023 is going to be key to see how that goes forward with it. A lot of what we're seeing here in this presentation is federal government to you as a consumer, but there are some other pieces there that'll still in play as a lot of that gets sorted through.
And what about landlords, privately property owned privately by landlords? I mean, the renter incentives are apparent, but of course, many of the appliances they use are owned by the landlord and subject to their decision making. Anything in the IRA that incentivizes private landlords to make those kinds of switches?
Yeah, I think ultimately there's some of the same process that you would have as a single family residence homeowner. Appliances age out. You need to make some changes to that eventually. Those are things that you would have to do at some point. Usually, and what I see right next door, right over that way with the rental that is now trying to be sold, is that a lot of times rentals don't get the upkeep they need for their appliances, but especially for the building envelope and the like. So this may be something that makes that easier. Why do you see it as simple negligence as far as landlords and those who are renting a home that they own, that they don't get to that for time? Or is it because there's that challenge of meeting cost? So you are defraying cost. When we're talking about, again, the numbers that I was showing for me, some $30,000 in possible benefits, that's lowering that threshold and challenge for me as a homeowner, whether I'm renting my home or I own it, to be able to make those updates. So it might be something that we see as more attractive for those landlords and those who own rental units and the like to be able to do, as opposed to just, well, maybe let's wait another 5 years, get a couple more renters through there, and eventually we'll have to deal with that gas cook stove and the like beyond the barest, simplest maintenance. So I think that there's going to be some positive effects of that there too, Dean.
So are those opportunities for folks like us to be advocates at the local and state level to try to promote those changes that aren't necessarily built into the IRA?
Yes, and I'll get to that in just a few minutes. So if you'll let me punt on that, but that's a perfect segue to where we're going to be going towards wrapping up in a moment.
Then I've got one other question, which you might want to come back to later. Is there an ideal sort of point in the life cycle of an appliance to contemplate replacement, given the loss of the sunk investment in a newer appliance, or just the cost of manufacture of a new appliance and when it ought to be replaced?
Yeah, and I would add just to that last statement, Dean, as far as cost, there's the financial cost, but there's also the cost in terms of the carbon footprint to make that new even heat pump or make that new water heater and the like that's going to be way more efficient than what was there from 10, 15 years ago. So, the nice thing is for a lot of this, one of the big things that I haven't mentioned yet, and this is very market-oriented conversation back to my previous presentation with the group, is that what the IRA really does from the point of view of markets is it provides predictability for a decade. What you're looking at here for utilities and new solar installation, and yes, consumer credits and the like as well, is that you're talking about predictability for everything that goes into that. For the businesses like, say, Trane company that manufactures heat pumps and the like, or Mitsubishi, or a whole variety of things in terms of car producers, as well as those who make new solar PV, you're providing predictability for a decade here that is going to make a huge difference. And more to your question, that means that when is the best time for you to be able to replace that appliance? Well, obviously, if the appliance dies on you, you don't have much choice. But now you have a reason to make that a little quicker decision for you. I think as well that from my grandmother's generation, use it up, wear it out, do with less or do without. I think that still holds true generally for appliances because there is going to be a carbon footprint for a lot of time just to replace that piece. But certainly when you get into that question of alternative heating, when you're making big switches, when you're talking about switching from oil or natural gas heating to be able to move over to something like a heat pump, I think sooner is probably going to be preferable, sometime in 2023. Making that decision to upgrade your panels sooner is going to be good. You get into that point where a lot of the production processes for those things is tried and true and tested. They're a lot better now as well. Just on the heat pump point, and then I'll move on here for us. But for example, we bought a heat pump 10 years ago for our home. We've loved it. It's provided some air conditioning in some of those hot spells we've had. It's done pretty well keeping up with things as far as keeping the home nice and warm in the winter. But usually once you get down into the 30s for a stretch, the heat pump that I have can't keep up very easily. Well, the latest generation of them, just in the last couple of years, now they got heat pumps that will keep your house 75 degrees and sub-zero temperatures. That's a change in terms of the capability with it. So I would say if you're on that point of decision about is it time to move on from that heating appliance, particularly for your home, if you know that it's been aging, I think we're there. I think we're there. It's time for you to make that decision. And if that's in 2023, so you can take advantage of all this, then absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay. I see more questions kind of populating. Let me do this. I'm going to finish the presentation here a little bit as far as the PowerPoint, and then I want to loop back to those and respect people's interest and time. If that sounds like a decent plan, then let's do that. Okay, here we go. All right. One of the big questions that Susan was kind enough to remind me of the other day is the obvious political question. And we have news of that, of course, this weekend that I think provides a little more assurance going forward with that. And that's certainly the results that we're seeing from election 2022 here with the midterm elections and the like. So can Republicans impact the Inflation Reduction Act in 2023 and beyond? We know the Inflation Reduction Act was basically dead as a doornail in July, and then was magically resurrected in early August and then passed fairly quickly after that. So that was, I mean, incredible to see this big piece of work get done with all the implications, ramifications it has for climate and everything else. But of course, we have to ask ourselves, what's the political situation going to be in January when we have a new Congress sworn in, and potentially in January of 2025 if we're looking at a new president coming into office and the like that perhaps is from the Republican Party. I think a couple things to consider. One, that for right now, we're looking at a United States Senate that's going to be under the control of the Democratic Party for the next 2 years. And that certainly provides for this thing not only to get passed this summer as it was, but to get a lot of the heavy lifting and sorting out and the like done over the next 2 years. It's going to be very difficult for Republicans, assuming they do capture the House of Representatives, to be able to A, move past the Senate with any changes in legislation, and B, move past a presidential veto. So in a lot of ways, I'm feeling pretty good in terms of this election cycle and where we are, that changing this in any substantial way is going to be nearly impossible over the next 2 years. There's certainly the ability in a House Oversight Committee, if Republicans capture the House of Representatives, that they can look at regulation and the like through different House committees, if they do end up chairing those, in ways that can throw a little sand in the gears, perhaps. But I don't think that's going to be terribly material to the process as it goes forward with the Inflation Reduction Act. Until January 2025, I think this work's going to proceed on a pretty good pace. The other part, and Susan and I have discussed this a couple times, is that we can't think of the Inflation Reduction Act as one thing. Obviously, it doesn't just deal with climate, it deals with deficit reduction and then also healthcare. But even just inside that one area of climate, it's not one thing, it's 100 things. You're talking about incentives, rebates, all sorts of things to utilities, to states, to consumers and the like. It's basically trying to herd bees if you're going to, or herd cats, I guess, if you're going to try to turn this thing off. It's not like Obamacare, where you could basically gut it in terms of its mandate and suddenly becomes less effective to some degree. This is not one single target. It's hundreds of moving targets. And the reality is that motion is already in way. Markets are looking at this. They're taking signals. We're seeing results now that the market is following guidance of the federal government. As I made the metaphor of in a previous presentation, when it comes to this, what's driving the clean energy revolution forward like a train, the engine to that is markets. The engine to that is local governments. The end of that is businesses, and yes, consumer decisions. It's not the federal and national governments. They can apply the brakes or not. With this passage of this act this summer, our federal government, the United States anyway, has taken the brakes completely off. It's go, go, go time. And I don't think one political party, even if they do capture the House, is going to be able to slow that down very much at all. It's going to be too much momentum here. And down the road, 2 years from now, I think the game changes even more favorably for clean energy. So I think in a lot of cases here, as far as the ability of Republicans to impact this, other than tinkering around the edges eventually in January 2025 or beyond, the horse is already out of the barn and it's galloping. So I think that's something to consider in a very optimistic way. Now, Dean asked this question before I take other questions with that question of advocacy. And I'm mindful of the time here, and I think I'm probably right about at my edge for it. So I'll try to be brief in that, and then we can get on with the rest of the program. What can you do? Hopefully, first off, you'll share these resources with others. Share that calculator. I've sent that to, oh gosh, about a dozen people that I know now, just anecdotally. People who are talking about their homes or talking about upgrading this or that, or they're thinking about these things, and they wonder now. But what they don't know is necessarily how they interface with that. So we all want to be in that position where we go to a contractor when we need a bid saying that, hey, I know what I'm talking about. I know what these rebates are, and let's work together to do this best, as opposed to the, tell me what the rebates are, I don't know. So hopefully that's one tool that can be helpful for you in the course of that. After I finish with this, I'll be happy to share the link to the video I was showing earlier. I showed 4 minutes of it. It's an hour and a half. It's brilliant, and it really gets into a lot of the depth here. So share these resources with others is a big piece. As always, when I get the chance to present to this great group, you're always going to hear me pull the social studies teacher card, which is what I am at heart, and say, call your elected representatives. Express your support for the Inflation Reduction Act and clean energy, and that's your elected representatives at the state level, at the local level, at the federal level. And I think especially where the push is still really necessary is for multifamily dwellings, for renters and for families and the like that will get some advantage out of this, but not as much as those who are homeowners. We need to continue to push in that area. We just simply do. There needs to be more reason, more incentive for them to adopt the cleanest energy prospects possible for their appliances, for their homes and their lives. So I think we need to continue to push on that. And then again, plan ahead to electrify your home. Realize that none of us probably has the budget to do all this at once. So where do you start? I think that starting with your panel to upgrade service and rewire as needed is a big deal. That opens the gate for you to do more with your home. A lot of homes are going to need 200 to 300 amp service in the future for an all-electric home. You saw that some in the video. To have an all-electric home and an electric car, we had to upgrade and add 60 amp service to our home to bring us to about 260 to have 2 electric cars, a house that's 1,700 square feet, all electric appliances all the time, and that suits us pretty darn well. So that's something you want to be thinking about doing, especially if you have, say, 100 amp service right now and a lot of natural gas. Get that panel going so you can be able to take that in and the like with it. And then finally, speak to your utility about accessing federal incentives. I think that's a big part of it as well. A chance for us to be able to think about it too. And connecting with your utility can be a really valuable thing. I had a chance to talk to them, Seattle City Light again on Saturday or Friday rather. We were at a car show here in Seattle and had a chance to talk about all sorts of different things for renewables. And, you know, even things like smart appliances for your home and devices to be able to maximize your energy savings and make sure that those appliances are operating the smartest, most efficient way possible. We live in an era where computers are increasingly dictating access to our lives, certainly in screen time, but even just in the running of your water heater and the like to optimize that is now available through technology. So I think that's something I would commend to you too.
Real quickly,
right, just briefly. Contact information, references, citations, and I'll wrap it there and take any other questions. Dean, if you want to tell me what to do, I'm all over it.
I wanted to just ask, is there anything in the IRA that deals with reducing methane emissions in the short term?
I think in the short term and particularly in the medium term over the next 5 years is probably where you see it the most. Yes, you do have it's not quite a methane tax, but effectively it is, that is there for that now. And that fits in with a lot of what you've seen for the global focus on methane, the pledge internationally to reduce methane emissions by 1/3 on a very short time span. You do see that in the Inflation Reduction Act that talks about some pieces primarily for for industry and large fossil fuel producers that does exist. And I invite you to dig into that, but it is definitely there. And it's one that has a small price for now, but it's one that provides a bit of a disincentive to prevent things like flaring in terms of oil wells and the like that are flaring off natural gas and just dumping that in the atmosphere. You're starting to see some pieces there. It's small, but I think it's going to have an effect over the next several years.
All right, thank you. I think a lot of questions that were posed have also gotten answers from other participants. So that's kind of typical of our group. We share with each other. Randy, I know you have other commitments, and so I want to thank you for your presentation. I don't see any other final questions, and so I think we're good to move on.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity to share. I hope I didn't take too much of the time, but you know me, once I get rolling, the mouth starts moving. Thanks, everyone. Great to be with you all again.
All right. So another way for us to get involved and to participate in advocacy for mitigating climate change is something we do every day. We talk. By talking to our families, friends, coworkers, church communities, neighbors, social groups, and our elected officials, we have opportunities to share our concerns and our wishes and hopes for mitigating the climate crisis, and also inviting others to share their perspectives and concerns. But we all know that talking turkey about climate change, policies, solutions, the resources that Randy just shared with us, can also, to others that have differing opinions, it's not always easy and can be especially difficult as we start gathering for our holiday gatherings with family and friends who to eat turkey and other delicious foods. However, our next video, a TED Talk by Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, who we saw in the initial video, her TED Talk is called "The Most Important Thing You Can Do to Fight Climate Change. Talk About It." Offers us some helpful tips on how to talk to others that may have differing opinions about climate change. So Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, she deserves a little bit more of an introduction. She's a Canadian, but we won't hold that against her. Is a climate scientist and professor in the Department of Political Science at Texas Tech University. That's Lubbock, Texas. It's a very conservative area of our country. She is currently the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy and has been honored with numerous rewards for her climate work and for her faith. This is something that I thought very interesting about her. In 2012, she was named one of Christianity Today top 50 women to watch. Dr. Hayhoe is a person of faith and science. To illustrate how talking about climate change can be powerful, Dr. Hayhoe converted her husband, an evangelical Christian who believed that his wife's work was a hoax when they first got married. After 2 years of discussion and research, mostly by her husband, he had his conversion and understanding that climate change was real and was affecting the globe. The two went on and they co-authored in 2009 the book, A Climate for Change, Global Warming Facts for Faith-Based Decisions. Dr. Hayhoe's current book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World, is a book I highly recommend that we all get a copy of and read. So now let us look at Dr. Katharine Hayhoe's TED Talk.
So this gives us a little bit of time now at the end of our session to have some group discussion. Brad, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment going into our discussion. As Hayhoe talked about finding those common values between ourselves and others, it reminds me the same thing of our enduring principles, that we're trying to live out and engage in our enduring principles or values the same way that she's lifting up the same thing. And I think it's a nice parallel for us in our own faith movement of understanding is that our relationships start from that place of similar values and principle-based systems and ideas. So I just thought that was a nice connection that I saw.
Thanks, Brad. And that's maybe a prompt for people who want to go look up when it's available, the today's Beyond the Walls service, and in particular, Lori Gordon's contribution in the peace remarks that she made during that service. So look it up. And that's just to give them a prompt like I think they gave us earlier today. But I wanted to just ask everyone now, well, we have a few minutes left. What stood out to you from Katharine Hayhoe's remarks? And I'm going to ask people to help me watch the screen for raised hands, or you can put something in chat if you'd like as well.
I have a comment. Cindy Campbell from Florida Mission Center. Our mission center has started having book clubs on Zoom. And I think that her book, Katharine Hayhoe's book, Saving Us, I believe is the name of it, would be an excellent book club to discuss, a book to discuss.
So it's a way to start a conversation in that kind of a book club group. Other thoughts? What stood out to you from what Katharine had to say? So let me ask you a different question while you're thinking about that one. Have you had a conversation in the recent past, or even maybe longer ago, about this challenge we face in our climate crisis with someone where it was a difficult conversation, but you were able to connect? And what made that conversation work? Anybody have an example of having that kind of a conversation with someone?
Mary Jacks has her hand raised.
Mary? I have a question.
Hi. Wanted to just share the subject of today's worship helps was so good, raising the issue of climate change on soil, on giving love to the earth, opened up for us where Judy could share the Venn diagram. So folks, we talked about it today, and wonderful example. I was downtown addressing your question, Dean. I was downtown Redmond, Oregon, in a shop and got into the discussion of climate change. The other person on the other side, and I listened, I acknowledged, and as I did that, it was amazing that that person recognized that I was listening to them, and only then could they hear what I had to say. So, a lot of things going on. Our apostle was with us last weekend, raised that this Climate Change Committee is doing something very important. So we recognize you, we raise you, and it would have been good for him to also say who else in the congregation is involved, who goes to the webinars. And so my task now is to raise the consciousness and to talk, but first of all, to listen so they're recognized as people of worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Kathy? You're muted.
Yes, I am actually going to refer to some advice that we received at our political party from our current and re-elected legislator. And she is in favor, she does recognize climate change as an issue and wants to work to resolve it. When she talks with her constituents who are very put off by the word climate change, she substitutes the word conservation. And she says, I can have the same productive conversation with them as long as I don't use the term climate change and use conservation. They relate to that, they accept that, and then we can understand each other. So, little tip.
Thank you, Kathy. Others? What were your thoughts?
This is Mike Barnett from Florida. I'd just like to say that the thing that stood out in the presentation from Kathy was hope, and how important hope is in a conversation, to find that that common ground where we can relate to each other on hope is important.
Thank you. And Sherry, I saw you had your hand up.
One of the things that she commented on that struck me again, I sort of knew this in the back of my mind, but I guess I hadn't really internalized it, was the very small percentage of the pollutants that are created by the developing world. And I guess that always surprises me, because when you're there, you see little cooking, you know, fires everywhere, and you see it in the atmosphere. And so that being small, nevertheless, I think that's where I'm working. That's where I want to tackle it. That's where I want to help people with the climate change that's impacting them. So I have been really working hard to inform myself. I feel so way behind what everybody else knows about permaculture and all of the things that people are talking about. So Jack and I visited 2 farms this last week to learn about how to raise chickens on the little tiny plots that they move the little carts around from place to place. And we've been watching Kiss the Ground and, you know, all of the other films that everybody else is watching, with the intent that when we go back to Africa, we will slowly be able to introduce some of the thoughts like the cover crops. This is not how they've done things. And they will not want to take a chance that what they raise, by what we say, might not be as productive as what they've been doing when the margin of survival is so slim. So I think we will be probably doing half at a time with Health Ed Connect. And that would be, several years ago, we introduced the idea of tire gardens. That I've talked to some of you about that. And the next year when I came, they had all their tire gardens and they were just flourishing. And they said, but we've got to admit something, Sherry. And I said, what's that? And they said, when you told us about it, we thought it was a joke. And so we bought the tires that you told us about, but we planted our own garden right beside us, so we'd be sure and have a garden. Well, of course, they found out the tire gardens were easier, they took less water, and on and on. So I think that's my idea of how, after we talk with them, that we will probably approach the newer farming methods that in the end will be greatly advantageous to them, but they have to prove to themselves. They have to believe that it's going to be better in the long run in order to adopt it.
Thank you, Sherry. Michael Clark. You're still muted, Michael.
Okay, thanks. Yep. I was really impressed where she said we have to talk. I think that's really important. And we just don't have to talk to the adults. We need to talk to the young people as well, because it's their future. And we've been given a chance to share with our youth group on a Monday. So we're probably going to use some stuff from Katharine there. So, but I think it's really important to talk, because like some people do, they want to hide from climate change. But or some people just don't take any notice of it. But I think if a few more of us talk and talk to the youth, they can share that with their parents. So that's all from me. That's all.
Thank you, Michael. Andrew Fellow says, what stood out for me was that as a Christian, I care for people and the planet, and highlighting the good news about what our world looked like, what our world can look like. Rational hope, food for all, energy abundance, clean water. Did I capture that, Andrew, or do you want to add to that? Okay. Others, any example of a conversation you might have had? I really liked the Mary Jack's example of her conversation and the listening aspect. Anybody else have a similar experience? Okay. Well, I think we're just about to our end time, and so I'm going to move us now to a reminder about our next session. And so if you can put up the slides then again, Paul. On Sunday, December 4th, we're going to have the opportunity to dive in deeper even into the challenge that Katharine has given to us about how do we have meaningful and genuine conversations. We'll be past the Thanksgiving holiday by then. Maybe as you come back and others join, you'll have examples of conversations that may have occurred with the extended family over the Thanksgiving meal. Or you may have other opportunities between now and then. But we'll have a chance on December 4th to go deeper into what Katharine suggests is our biggest challenge: how to talk to people, how to talk to each other, how to have conversations. And so I look forward to that opportunity and to having you all join us again for that session. Next slide. Also want to let you know that beyond the holiday period, starting in January, our webinars during January through March will be focused on helping us prepare for World Conference in late April, where we'll be certainly focusing on themes of restoration and sacred creation. And those dates will be announced, but the times will again be times that we have used before. Note your particular time and your time zone. And we'll be preparing for what the team will also be doing when it goes to World Conference in April. We'll be having some sessions that we'll be building toward in those January through March sessions. So any last thoughts, either from anybody in the audience or from team members, before we say thank you and wish you a good remainder of your weekend?
Yes, Dean, I just wanted to say real quick, in talking with my conservative relatives, especially during the holidays when we get together, if I can help them to see how it will, how their changes in their lifestyle will benefit them financially. If I can talk money, it makes a difference.
Good point. Thank you for that.
And perhaps if you share some of the links to the calculator that Randy shared with us, if you know that they are wanting to make any changes, in their household, that kind of calculator that can help them get rebates and tax credits and things like that, you don't have to necessarily go into a lot of depth about climate change. Just talk about the efficiency of a home and what can cut down on bills and aid people financially. So I think that's a really good comment, Mike.
All right, so thank you all very much again for your participation, and we will hope to see you then on December 4th. Good afternoon.